My story happened in the early 2000s. I was 22 or 23 at the time and excited to take my girlfriend Shelley, who I'd been with for 5 or 6 weeks, to the drive-in. It was early March, so still quite cold, and this particular drive-in always showed great horror films when they were open, which was at completely random times. If I'd known what was going to happen, I'd have taken her to the other one a few miles out of town, which was more mainstream, I guess. But Shelley and I had actually bonded over a love for horror, so the fact that this place was a bit weird only added to the night. I'd borrowed my dad's SUV and had a few funny looks on the ride in, like I was overprivileged or something, but I didn't care. It felt good that I got to take her out in it. We parked up and got snacks straight away. It was a misty night, and on the walk back to the car, we heard some screams. I thought it was people just messing about at first, and we didn't think much of it, and climbed into the SUV where it was nice and warm. It was about 5 minutes into the film when screaming started again. It gave me quite a shock, to be honest, but I looked in the wing mirror and saw a guy dressed up as some sort of masked killer peering through the window of the car behind us. He looked pretty creepy, and I laughed it off, as did Shelley, but I hoped that he didn't come this way. Luckily for us, he didn't. We were at the edge of the car park and there were trees that surrounded it, so I guess he walked off into the trees for added effect, and we wouldn't know when he'd come out again, which was unnerving. As much as I didn't want to go, I had to use the restroom about halfway into the movie. Shelley said that she'd be fine for a few minutes, so I did a half walk, half run to the bathrooms, which were behind the screen, obscured by some trees. The urinal looked flooded, which was gross, so I opted to use the only empty cubicle, the other one being occupied, and had to remove a type of spider that I'd never seen before. Within a few seconds of me flushing it down the toilet, there was a loud noise in the cubicle next to me. It sounded like the door was kicked open. Then, there was a scream. Somebody hit the wall of the cubicle and there were horrible stabbing sounds which I will never forget. I knew that if I stayed where I was, then I could be next. So I quietly unlocked the cubicle door, opened it, then ran out. There was nobody I could report it to, nobody was around. So I went back to the SUV. I told Shelley everything and she said that we needed to leave, then call the cops. Sadly, neither of us carried a cell phone back then, and although we were at the edge of the car park, cars still surrounded us and I couldn't move anywhere. I decided it would be a good idea to tell the people behind us what had happened, and they could pass it on, and we could all get out of here. But as I went to open the door, the man in the mask appeared. Shelley screamed, and I just sat there, frozen. He had blood on his hands and sweater. We locked eyes for a few seconds, then he disappeared again. That was it. I reversed the SUV and lightly bumped the front of the car behind. Of course, they sounded the horn and got out the car to confront me. I recounted what had happened. They saw my face and knew that I was telling the truth. Then they phoned the police on their cell phone. A few days later, I found out that the deceased man in the cubicle was named Robert Malloy. He was 37 years old, and it was presumed to be a random attack. The drive-in cinema never showed another movie after that night. The area is now overgrown and unremarkable. You'd never guess that a man had been brutally murdered there. As for the man in the mask, the drive-in owners had never hired anyone that night, so he could have been anybody, and he's probably still out there somewhere, ready to do it again.
My best friend Rachel and I had been really looking forward to this new thriller coming out, and we were delighted when we discovered it was being shown at Silver Screens, which was the really original name for our local drive-in. We booked tickets as soon as we found out it was showing, and I got us there early on the night. In fact, I think we were the first ones there. 10 or 20 minutes after we ordered our snacks and had them delivered to the car park started to fill up. This huge truck pulled in behind us, and in all honesty, I thought that a couple of big guys with beer bellies would get out of it. But to my surprise, it was 3 women, about 25 or 26 years old. I don't know why, but I just got a bad vibe from them. My mom would have said they looked like Okies, I suppose, but I try not to judge, and certainly don't want to sound like my mother. They hadn't done anything to me at that point, so I tried to relax and watch the previews. The movie began, and the wave of excitement I usually felt was just not there. All I could hear was laughing and music coming from that truck. I could tell it was really annoying Rachel. There was a number to text for food, but that was it. In a passive-aggressive way, Had there been another number, I would have spoken to someone. One of the girls dialed the volume up, and that was it. Rachel opened the door and got out the car. I was actually relieved at that moment. I have to hand it to Rachel. She was quite reserved and just said that we couldn't hear the movie. So could they keep it down, please? The three women just started laughing, and to be fair, they did turn the volume down. For a few minutes. Then things got ugly. A beer bottle hit my back window, and they put their high beams on, which dazzled me for a moment. One of them got out the truck and banged on my window, calling me every name under the sun. And on Rachel's side, one of the women was tapping a knife against the glass. It was time to go. Because we were at the very front, it actually made it easier to drive out. There was a good 10 feet of space between us and the screen, and a large area at the edge of the car park. I didn't hang around, and I think Rachel may have shouted something like redneck trash or words to that effect as we maneuvered away. My heart was still pounding as we got out of there and onto the road. The only problem was that we saw lights following us out of the Silver Screens car park, and I recognized that god-awful truck. It was them. They were coming. I really put my foot down and raced along a stretch of road known as Miller's Run. At the end of the road, there was a sharp left turn, and if you didn't know it was there, you'd miss it completely, then have to back up and find it again. It was a gamble, but I thought it was our best shot. Those women definitely weren't from around here, so they hopefully didn't know it was there. They were gaining on us. I prepared to turn the car at a speed that was faster than I was comfortable with. I braked at the last second and swung the car over to the left and drove down the narrow dirt path that led to an adjoining road. Now, I didn't see this myself, but after I'd swung left, Rachel said that the girls' car skidded and flipped over. They were going so fast and must have lost control trying to follow us. Either way, Rachel cheered in delight, and we kept going until we were home safely. Rachel stayed over that night, and I parked the car in the garage, closing the door afterwards. I know it probably sounds silly, but I just wanted it hidden. We debated about calling emergency services to report the accident. Those girls were horrible psychos for sure, but the image of them stuck in a wreckage was starting to distress both of us. Rachel checked Facebook quickly and saw on our town's page that Miller's Run had been temporarily closed due to an auto accident. Luckily, we didn't have to make a decision after all. The post didn't say if any bodies had been recovered or if anybody had survived. Maybe those girls are still out there.
One of the worst cases of mass murder happened in my hometown, back in the 50s when I was a young man and very much in love. I wasn't into movies much, but Tracy was, so I took her to the drive-in. It was a Friday night and the car park was about half full as we arrived, which was fine. I hated when it got really busy. Neither of us had eaten, so after we parked up, we spotted a burger van out in the trees. Seemed like an odd place to put it, but we were hungry, so took a stroll over there. There was a bit of a queue for the van, which was called Captain Meats, much to the amusement of Tracy and I. When it came to our turn, we were introduced to Captain Meats, who was one of the oddest and most interesting people I've ever met. The guy was huge, and he didn't stop talking. He was jolly enough, but you also got the impression that he had a nasty side to him as well. We ordered a monster burger each, and when they were ready, we realized that they were worthy of the name. We paid up and went back to the car. I finished that burger in 10 minutes. Working construction had given me an appetite that could outmatch most people's. Tracy stopped halfway through hers for a breather just in time for the movie to start, after countless previews that nobody paid attention to. About half an hour later, she leant over and kissed me, which I was not expecting, but it was a welcome surprise. It would have gone on for longer had we not heard a commotion from a couple of cars away. I think it was someone vomiting. That's an unmistakable sound. We both got out the car to see what was going on. It was hard to tell at first, as there was a young woman who was just going crazy and two men going after her. My instinct told me to intervene, but then I realized that these men were only trying to calm her down as she was moving erratically and totally hysterical. One of the guys said he was her cousin, and he didn't understand what she was doing. Car by car, More well-meaning people came out to try and help, but each was more confused than the last one. Then it happened. The movie paused, but this was no intermission like we were used to. The pause transitioned to images of the car park, our cars, even of us, all to weird, creepy carnival-type music. Then, we saw Captain Meats on screen, his face zoomed right in and sweaty. He laughed out loud and the camera panned back to him chopping with a meat cleaver. He was cutting up a human leg, the bone being mashed along with the flesh. Words and phrases like, "enjoy your meats" and "clean your plate" flashed up amongst the increasingly disturbing images of people bound and gagged. This was really a horrible thing to see. Then the woman who had been screaming before was sick again, but this time it made other people shout and scream, because they saw what had come out of her. The face of Captain Meats grinning like a madman up on the screen almost mocked my realization of what was going on. We'd been eating people. The monster burgers, hot dogs, and God knows what else were all made from human flesh. The screaming woman had vomited out a human finger, and I ran back to the car and threw the other half of Tracy's burger on the floor. People were panicking and running in every direction. Cars started up their engines and tried to hightail out of the car park, but with all the panic, they couldn't move far. There were many people being sick, and I dry heaved quite a few times, but mostly I just wanted to get Tracy out of there. I saw a mob head for where Captain Meat's van had been parked, but I couldn't see it there. He must have sneakily driven away before he sabotaged the movie. It took time, but eventually I got us out of the car park. An army of police cars and ambulances hurtled past us on the other side of the road. It was the Monday afterwards when it was confirmed that human meat had indeed been served that night. The powers that be had examined leftover samples, and about 100 feet from where that burger van had been parked, there were body parts found in a mass shallow grave. I don't know if it was ever determined exactly how many, but estimates were around 30. This had been a big operation happening right under our noses. Eventually, though, they caught him. Captain Meat's real name was Peter Castelletti. He'd been declared a war hero during World War II and started up a catering business when he returned home. The cinema company hired him after tasting some samples of his food, and he admitted to the murder of countless individuals. Just why he did this and why he deceived people into cannibalism was unclear. He was annoyingly vague to the folk studying him. Castelletti would just smile when pressed about the subject and shrug, sometimes saying that a good chef always makes an impression. Well, they cooked him medium rare about 6 months later when he got the chair.